And thank you for joining for today's webinar. My name is Ludmir, founder and business development of Calcom, a vendor which is dealing with baseline hardening and CIS benchmark enforcements. Today's webinar is about CMMC compliance. We'll discuss the topic of CMMC, what is the current compliance structure, and also drill down into the specific topic of baseline hardening, secured configuration, and how they reflect inside the CMMC compliance framework. Let's start. So quickly, let's review the agenda. We'll discuss the CMMC evolution since 2020 till today. What are the current requirements? What is the enforcement reality? What you are actually required to do? Right now we are with CMMC Level 2 and with a specific enforcement level called Phase 2. So we'll drill down into what it means and how you should prepare for it. Then we'll go into the world of baseline hardening and how it is reflected inside the CMMC framework, what baselines we should use, how this is being audited, what we need to prepare for, and hardening challenges, and a little bit of ways to automate and the Calcom solution. So this is our agenda for today, and let's start. So the CMMC evolution over the past few years, as we can see, this whole concept of CMMC was proposed in 2019 to 2020 with 5 maturity levels, but back then there was a big pushback from the community stating that this whole topic is less relevant or not as clear as it should be, and a little bit too challenging to deal with. Then in 2021, CMMC 2.0 was announced, and we've seen the 3 levels that we're familiar with today. And basically, this whole topic of CMMC was based on NIST 800-171 framework that is also related to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So more of a familiar concept and not just the 5 maturity levels that we've seen before. Fast forward to December 2024, we are starting to see the initial phases of, can say it as the enforcement of the CMMC standard. So it's not a voluntary thing anymore. We're heading towards a mandatory standard that need to be implemented by DoD contractors. And this whole level of the whole concept of the C3 PAOs, what is their roles, what are their responsibilities, actually was familiar with to the industry, to the community. Moving to September 2025, this is where the DFARS rule was published, which basically means if you want to register for a federal or a DoD bid, you need to implement CMMC. So this is where actually we shifted from a standard that is voluntary to a mandatory standard that must be enforced. And in November 2025, there was another specification where basically the explanation or there was a clarification saying that you need to enforce level 1 and level 2, and there is until November 2026 to actually start and work with the C3 PAOs, which are basically third-party assessments and not just an internal assessment of the organization. But this is a third party. It might be a consultant, but he needs to be certified in order to run this type of assessments. So we are now in between phase 1 live and phase 2, which is where we'll need to have the assessments by a third party certified consultant. And we're heading towards completing this by November 2026. So now is really the time where you need to find your C3 PAOs and start to work with them on the implementation of the of level 1 and level 2. The next step, or what is planned for us right now, is in November 2027. There is a will to go and enforce level 3 requirements. So that's another subset of settings and controls that need to be implemented. Um, and then in November 2028, the goal is to go into full enforcement of all level 1, 2, and 3 to all contractors with third-party assessments. So right now we are starting to see the real enforcements of CMMC. There is still a lot of uncertainty in terms of how things are going to be audited, but the direction is becoming clear as we are moving forward. So what actually changed in the enforcement in November 2025? This is where things really started to change, and the main thing, as we discussed, is DFARS 48, and DFARS 48 is basically saying in a very clear way that if you want to be and be part of a DoD contract, um, you must be CMMC compliant with level 1 and level 2. Okay, and you need to show certifications for this. This is not a nice to have type of thing anymore. On top of that, we're also seeing some civil penalties, and of course everything related to phase 2 by November 2026, and the assessments of C3 PAOs. It's becoming a real the reality of contractors these days. Um, and maybe the big change here is that you don't just need to claim or show documentation. You really need to prove that you're secured. Okay, it's not just that we have policies and procedures, it's that we are actually implementing them into our production environments, into systems that are holding CUIs and managing CUIs. So it is becoming a new reality for contractors, and therefore a lot of activity is currently happening in the community, in the market to close this gap. So there will be no problem with bidding. Just a quick overview of what are the CMMC levels. So level 1, which is foundational, we are looking into only 17 security requirements. It's a really basic. And the assessment is an annual self-assessment with no external auditors or assessors that are performing the assessment. And this is relevant to all DoD contractors, regardless if they are holding CUI or not. This is relevant to all of them. Then we're moving to where the majority of the work is, and most contractors are, and this is level 2. So level 2 is the advanced, and it holds about 110 security requirements. So it covers pretty much everything from network security, perimeter security, EDRs, vulnerability management. A lot of these common security practices are in level 2. And it is relevant to about 80,000 contractors which are handling CUIs today. Okay. Now, unlike foundational or level 1, with level 2, we do need a third-party assessment to be conducted in our systems in order for us to be compliant or to prove compliance. And as we stated before, we are heading towards level 3, another 24 security requirements, more strict settings and controls that need to be implemented. But this is moving forward, and probably by November 2027, we'll have more clarity about what actually is required in this case. Now, if we're looking into the controls, let's now drill down into the specific control or controls that we are dealing with inside level 2. We have the configuration management domain. So configuration management domain is assembled of six different controls that are directly relevant for this whole topic of secured configuration, um, baseline hardening, how to maintain the secure configuration of our systems, etc. And let's just have a quick review of the different settings, starting with the CML2341, which is basically telling us you need to establish a baseline configuration. You need to document it, you need to maintain it, and it should be configured on all systems that are handling CUI. So it's pretty straightforward. You need a baseline. You need it to be enforced on your CUI handling systems, and it is a mandatory and a setting that is going or control that's going to be checked. Then establish config settings, establish and enforce security configuration settings reflecting the most restrictive mode consistent with operational requirements. Kind of a way for us to decide or in a way get a recommendation on how we actually establish the baseline config. So there is a little bit of an overlap between these two controls, but both of them are basically saying or providing the direction that we should have a restrictive configuration settings that are enforced on our servers and fully documented and not just a very lean and basic baseline. Then track changing, CML2343. You need to track, review, approve, and log changes to organizational systems, which means we need to have some kind of a change control capability in terms of a hardened system that is already compliant. We should have full log of any unauthorized change to the system. In some areas, we call it configuration drift, which means what can happen to the system's configuration as it is currently managed in production. But here CMMC is coming and saying you don't just need to enforce or establish a baseline or secured configuration. You also need to track the changes and have full audit log of this. CML2344 is talking about the change impact from a security standpoint. They are referring here to approved changes that we want to perform on a system. And in the case that we are performing a change that is violating our baseline, we should be able to know or understand the impact on our security, overall security of the system. So in case, for example, I want to enforce password policies, local password policies that are not as strict as my official baseline configuration is showing, I should be aware of the impact here. It is also better or always better to document it and not just be aware of it, but to show that you have full control and every change or violation or deviation of your baseline that you are performing is well documented, and you have the real proof why you decided to change something. Restrict non-essentials, which means restrict, disable, prevent the use of non-essential programs, functional ports, protocols, and services. Kind of add more color to what is an established baseline. And next slide we'll discuss which baselines are recommended to use. But in this case, we get some guidance into the topics that should be included in this type of baseline. So, of course, protocol services, different functions and ports are basic security settings and configurations that must be involved or part of a restrict baseline. And then the whole concept of least functionality. So least functionality basically means if we don't need a component on our system, device, server, it should be removed. It should be disabled. Just like we have least privileges with users, with computers and applications, we would like to enforce least functionality. It is all connected to how we define our baseline and where it can be implemented. But as long as we are fully implementing the baseline, we should be able to cover also this topic of list functionality. So these are the main controls that are relevant for the configuration management or secured configuration domain. It is pretty detailed and strict and really require us to enforce a robust baseline. Now, in the end of the day, as a security and IT infrastructure teams, we will need to work with a baseline. And the fact that we need to work with a baseline doesn't mean that we need to invent one for ourselves or come up with something and perform the research. It is better actually to use what is already available out there in the market. And from our research and talking to assessors and auditors, it seems like all the 6 controls under the domain of secured configuration will be met by enforcing either the recommended or the DoD required options that we are showing here when it comes to baseline. So the recommendation for most contractors, because you are not part of the DoD, you are still a contractor, and it is better to just enjoy the fact that you're a contractor. The recommendation is to use CIS benchmarks. So CIS benchmarks, if you're not familiar with them, these are a subset of PDFs based on the type of system, device, server that we need to harden. They are widely accepted across both the private sector and the public sector, with a level 1 basic baseline, level 2, which is more strict, and are available for most systems. So Windows servers, workstations, Linux, network devices, you can find CIS benchmarks for all of them just by going to their benchmark and so to the website and downloading the benchmarks. Then you get the DISA STIGs. So DISA STIGs are a bit of a nice to have when it comes to contractors. They are a little more strict, but these days in some of the benchmarks, they are pretty similar to the CIS benchmarks. But DISA STIGs are provided by the Defense Information System Agency as part of the DoD, and they are enforced on all DoD-owned systems. You can use them. They're actually mapping in some of the cases to NIST 853. So if you are implementing these sticks, you should be also NIST 853 compliant. And right now, for level 2, they're not mandatory. They might become mandatory for level 3, but it is still a bit early to say. But for level 2, actually CIS benchmarks should be enough. And the third option, and we wouldn't recommend using them as your main baseline, but it might be an additional data source for you when you are defining your formal baseline. But it can be the vendor hardening guides. So if you'll go to Microsoft, there are some baselines for Windows servers, Windows workstations, same for Red Hat or VMware. There are recommendations. In most cases, they fully overlap with CIS benchmarks or DISA sticks, but you might see some exceptions where something that the vendor is asking for is not in the CIS benchmark. So always good to have another reference of a vendor-based benchmark, but as for actually implementing and achieving the initial baseline, we wouldn't recommend just going with the vendor hardening guides, because nowadays the research which is performed at a community level in organizations such as CIS and definitely in DISA sticks is more mature and covering more points. So as we need to define our baseline to become CMMC compliant, CIS benchmarks or DISA sticks are definitely the go-to. And then the next question is, once we have a baseline and we implement it, what is it that we need to prepare for the time when we'll be audited by, right now, those are the C3PAOs assessors. But what we need to have in place what it should look like. And we prepare this quick checklist for you um, to be able to go through and review and make sure that you are ready. So let's divide it into three. We have the documentation part, we have the actual technical evidence, and then we have the interviews and demos, which are more relevant when the auditor is visiting the site or the infrastructure and would like to get an understanding of the actions that were done. So let's start with documentation, and documentation should start from the day that we are starting to handle this topic of secure configurations. And the first thing is, of course, to have the full listings of all the baselines. So per operating system, per application, we would like to have a detailed documentation of a baseline. It can be a PDF, it can be a spreadsheet. But it's very important that when our assessor is coming in asking, hey, please let me see your documentation, the baseline documentation, you have it ready for him. It should be defined according to the type of system. So you can't just have one general Windows baseline. It should be dedicated for Windows servers according to their versions and workstations according to versions. So you should keep it well organized. Then everything related to change management policy and procedures. It can be the initial implementation of the baseline, but also once the systems are compliant, what is the change approval process, how it is being loaded, how it is being added, how it is being reviewed, and where this data is kept. So an auditor potentially might come and say, hey, if there was a change that was done on a system 6 months ago, where can I see the approval that this change, or where can I see the documentation that this change was actually approved and went through the formal change approval process? This is very important to prepare and think about not just the initial documentation, but also how this goes into your daily routines in your production environment. A general configuration management planning is always a good thing to have. Don't go just into the baselines themselves, but more for broader plan how this is going to be implemented across the entire organization. And as we stated before, again, the approved configuration change is extremely important. Now, technical evidence is a way to show that we implemented what we should implement, and in our live production environment, the systems are well maintained. And we're starting with the basic thing, and this is the vulnerability scans reports or a compliance scan. They both will pretty much do the same, which means show your existing systems and how they are scored against your baseline. Of course, if you're using CIS or STIGs as a reference to the baseline, it's one thing, but also very important that in the end of the day, you are scanning against your formal baseline. So the compliance scan and output or vulnerability scan, which are pretty much the same, are critical for when an auditor is coming in. Evidence of settings that were applied, like registry exports, config files, scripts. This can be done either by logging into systems, or on the other hand, you can create some kind of a configuration like a CMDB where you will have this type of data ready inside the system. It's a little different than a scan. It's where you're managing your asset inventory that, by the way, will cover other topics related to CMMC, but under the asset itself to keep, for example, a registry export or config file is something that is a pretty good practice. Audit logs to show unauthorized changes. It's not about documenting and approve changes, but also to be able to show the logs and keep the logs of unauthorized changes. And then drift reports, whenever we have a drift, we want to make sure that this is well documented. And again, if a drift happened from the baseline, it is one thing to remediate it, but also another thing to make sure that over time these drifts and remediation actions are logged and saved. So these are the technical evidence. Now, what is also important is to make sure that when the assessors are coming in, someone can provide them the right answers. So first of all, it is important that your IT team, security teams, will be able to explain the process of configuration, of securing the configuration of their systems of baseline hardening. So they are well aware of the documentation and the technical evidence. I've seen cases where everything was in place, but the person that was interviewed by the auditor had no idea what's going on. So they should be able to also demonstrate how deviations are detected and corrected. If there is a system for this, if there is a procedure for it, they should be able to control it. Monitoring is important. We want to make sure that monitoring is something that is happening in the environment and that people can demonstrate it. Yet your engineers can demonstrate the ongoing hardening procedure that is running. Everything related to new systems. It is important and recommended to add new systems into whatever baseline procedure that you have. And also to be able to demonstrate how this is done in terms of onboarding new systems. And the last thing is they should be able to explain what they're doing when there is an approved change control. So what is the procedure that is documented? And basically all of this section of interviews and demos is well connected to the documentation and technical evidence. It's just that the people need to understand what are the procedures, and it's not just something that someone knows, but no, it's the IT teams that need to be on top of and aware of it. So if you are covering the three topics, you should be more than good and ready when the auditor or the assessor or the C3PAO is coming in and running a configuration hardening assessment. What you need to prepare is not just the list that I showed before, but also we want to make sure that, and this is the list you should have is the must-haves, is that you have a proper security plan with the baseline configuration listed. You are identifying all the systems that are holding CUI and handling CUIs, that you have a baseline standard, and then that you have all the compliance reports, the change management approval processes, and the last thing is to make sure that you can show the evidence and the ongoing maintenance of this entire procedure and process of baseline hardening. Now, where are the challenges that we see, and we can look into configuration hardening and talk about it in a high level, but in the end of the day, implementing it is not as straightforward and simple. It's not just another tool that we buy and scan with. It's not just another document that we put in place. It's actually an implementation of a baseline that is holding hundreds of settings per operating system, per device. And first of all, this whole procedure of hardening requires a proper collaboration between IT and security. So the IT team, the server owners, the sysadmins, they need to be aware that as part of CMMC and achieving compliance, we need to implement secured configurations. And it should be declared as a project, because otherwise it will be very hard to onboard and get a proper collaboration from the sysadmins or whoever is actually need to implement the configuration. But there are a few challenges that we need to be aware of before going into this topic. And the first one and very important one is that there is an operational risk associated with um, with implementing the configuration. It's not just that we push these configurations to the devices and everything is okay and we achieve compliance and we go to the next task. There is a risk, and that's an operational risk of creating downtime and breaking things. You will probably deal with systems that are running in production for a few months up to few years and are holding critical applications. By performing the configuration changes, there is a very good chance that you're going to break things, and therefore it is important to test prior to enforcing the baselines. Um, your engineers will need the time and expertise and guidance to perform this testing. So keeping in mind, add it into the planning of the project, few hours per server if you're working in a manual way without proper automation tools. Then server variations. It can be operating system versions, it can be roles of servers, it can be different applications. You'll probably end up with one approved baseline, but the baseline that will be enforced on the system will be different from one system to another. Then enforcing them and finding the ways how to manage them is another thing to take into consideration. But you should not assume that one baseline will fit all of your machines and all of your servers. The third topic is related to configuration drift, and we discussed how it should be documented and how it should be monitored. So it is even more critical. We should, as part of CMMC, have a tool that is implement a tool that is constantly monitoring our configuration and avoid configuration drifts. Instead of manually going in and correcting them, our recommendation is to enforce in a proactive way, unlike GPOs or scripts that might have an interval of few hours or it's just a one-time enforcement. We recommend enforcing in an interval every few minutes, that this way you can control the setting and you should not see major configuration drifts. And the last thing is related to evidence for auditors. Yeah, we discussed vulnerability scanners before. There are many tools out there that can show you the evidence of the configuration, but it is important to have it as part of, at least connected to the hardening process, but just showing compliance reports that are not defined with the same baseline, same configuration as your approved one will lead to a gap in the compliance scores that you're showing. So these challenges are real and probably will take you into a pretty interesting hardening project. And therefore, what we can do and maybe how we can help you in Calcom to implement this is by providing hardening automation. And actually hardening automation, when you look into a standard like CMMC, which is well defined with very strict requirements, hardening automation is something that can save you a lot of time. Here at Calcom, we look into the challenges, we understand what sysadmins are required to do and how tedious is the work of hardening. And we came up with a solution that can help implement robust hardening in an automated way, doing it with few nice things or even critical topics that can really change the way this project will or the outcome of this project. And the first and most important thing is our ability to learn and provide zero impact hardening. So what we will do here at Calcom, instead of your sysadmins going and testing, we are going straight into your production environment. We learn the server to show you if there is going to be any impact before the configuration change is happening on the servers, and only then the enforcement is done, taking into account only the settings that won't have any impact, won't break anything in production. So zero impact hardening is extremely important when it comes to critical environments. Then per server tailoring of the baseline. In the Windows world, GPOs are very broad. You cannot handle individual servers with GPOs, or on the other end, in the Linux world, just pushing a script to a machine, managing it across hundreds of or thousands of machines can be quite challenging. Here at Calgon, we have the ability to tailor a relevant baseline based on the version and the role of the machine, and also the results of the learning mode. So it will still be managed with the most robust baseline, but you won't have any impact, or you won't break systems. But we have the ability to directly manage the hardening of the server or of the system without creating GPOs, without the challenges associated with managing systems at the domain level. Then the next thing is related to drift prevention. And in drift prevention, what we do is proactively monitor the systems and maintain the configuration. We'll override any unauthorized change that was performed on the server. If there was a change, we'll log it. So later on, you will have the evidence that there was a change, but it was remediated. And the last thing is the audit reporting and evidence readiness. So basically, we have the ability to show compliance dashboards that are updating every 4 hours, that are also providing the ability to drill down into a specific setting on a given computer, and everything related to exception management. So from a CMMC perspective, once you implement the baseline with us, you should be audit ready as long as your systems are connected to the Calcom management server. So between these four capabilities, you can be rest assured that CMMC auditors and assessors will be satisfied, as you will have both a robust baseline enforced on the systems, but then a full documentation and audit trail of any change that was performed on the systems. And this is it for today. What we covered is the CMMC requirements, the evolution of CMMC, how it is being enforced from a hardening standpoint, what are the CMMC requirements, and also how it is being enforced, and what we think, and we'll probably see in the next few months, how it is being audited by the three CPAOs, auditors and assessors, and actually what you need to prepare. Then the hardening challenges, and also how Calcom can help. If you're currently dealing with a CMMC implementation and the topic of hardening is coming up, please feel free to contact us at calcomsoftware.com, and we will be happy to set a product demo for you and discuss how we can help you implement robust baseline in an automated fashion and without breaking production. Thank you very much for your time.